Bill, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Just to reinforce some of the things Bill said, with respect to the industry, speaking a lot, as I do in my job with a lot of the industry officials, I think one has to appreciate the fact that the oil industry is moving forward to try to make advances in developing more environmentally friendly fracking fluids and materials. I just read about a fluid called SteriFrac that's supposed to be 100% environmentally friendly. So this is a very dynamic industry. I think we're still in the very early stages of moving forward with this technology, and the more the industry moves ahead, I think the more you see them taking on and bringing out new products that are going to make this a much more environmentally friendly and process, and improving the overall perceptions. So with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Tom Murphy. Tom is with the Penn State Marcellus Center for Outreach and Research. Tom has his degree from Penn State in Earth Sciences. And again, Tom is going to speak to us this evening on the economic aspects of Marcellus Shale development. Tom.
Tip the lights a little bit. How's it going to tip the lights down? I think it'd be easier to see the slide if we could tip at least the one in the front here. If we could. Okay, good evening. I'd like to talk about some of the things. Obviously, we're taking some different tacks here as we sort through some of the topics and some of the issues as it relate to Marcellus Shale. So we'll touch on a few different ones here. I'm going to talk about the workforce. I'm going to talk about the economics, talk a little bit about some of the drivers that are pushing this along and what we expect now and the trends as we look into the near future. So we'll try to cover some of those. Just a quick question before I start. How many people have been to a Marcellus or a shale development meeting up to this point, beyond this one here tonight? How many people have been to one? Okay, so most have not been out. How many people have read something about it in the newspaper? How many people have read about it in the newspaper 50 times? Okay, how many people are from Bucks County? Most of you. Okay. Sure.
Is there anybody having trouble seeing it? When we're trying to tape this, and if we lower the lights, it's going to be really dark for the tape. Is anybody having a real problem seeing that?
You can see it all right? Okay. All right. Some of the text might be a little small on a couple of the slides. We'll give it a good shot. Okay, so just trying to get a feel for what the group, what you've been through and what you've seen and what you've heard up to this point. One thing I'll also tell you is I'm maybe a little bit, as Bill did, a little bit of a bio as to where people are from. I'm from Doylestown. I grew up, my first 25 years of my life I spent down here in Bucks County, went to Central Bucks West. Darn proud of it, but live now up in Lycoming County, so moved to another part of the state and spent the most part of 30 years up there now. So this, live right in the midst of it. We have Marcellus that's going on all around our farm. We do have a farm up in that part of the state. Very happy to be there and enjoy that. But this is not an abstract concept to me. This is something that we live and feel and go through every single day. I spend a couple days a week working in Williamsport. I spend a couple days a week working up to university, and I spend the rest of the time, like today, driving from point A to point B and working in a variety of other places, not just in Pennsylvania, but in some of the surrounding states. So we get a chance to see what this development looks like, not just in Pennsylvania, not just in our area, but also in a very broad swath of the Appalachian Basin, and quite frankly, some other shale developments in other parts of the United States and even into parts of Canada. We look at the eastern part of Canada, the maritime provinces, as well as out in British Columbia, some of the work we've done out there, and Alberta. So the point is, this is developing in a very broad part of the globe, and we need to think about it that way. One of the things that I like to do as we talk about that is maybe a little bit of foundational work. Bill was talking about and showed a slide that might have had some similarities, but I think it's important to recognize as we see this in our community, we think, well, it's affecting me, or it's affecting, you know, what my family might be interacting with, or, you know, the extended community or region or whatever. But then it goes beyond that, goes to state, and then quite frankly, it goes to that global. And it's a lot of the global influences out there that are driving the economics, that is driving the development, is likely to drive some of the trends that we're seeing right now and into the future. So we need to think about it in those terms, that global type of interaction, not just what we're seeing within our individual community. And maybe that brings me to one other thing, and maybe I'll just ask one more question. How many people in the room have land that's up in the Marcellus area? Okay, a number of you. All right, often we find that's the case, and we've done meetings that we've done 600-700 public meetings, town hall meetings similar to this, and we find we come down into this corner of the state that actually the majority of those that come out for the meetings actually have lands up in the Marcellus area, some part of Pennsylvania, so we're not surprised by that. Bottom line is there's a lot of development going on out there in terms of shale. Marcellus, as Bill was indicating, is not the only player. There's a lot of other ones, and there's actually other shale plays that are developing in Pennsylvania as well. So the story is really beyond Marcellus. It's about shale development, and that's the part, that unconventional shale development, we're trying to keep introduced into the dialogue. I had a chance, and I think our moderator was talking about the Duke fellows and the work that they've done in Pennsylvania. They actually sponsored a conference a couple weeks ago, was down there speaking. One of the other speakers down there was a gentleman from ExxonMobil, borrowed one of his slides with his permission. As you can see, we sourced it out. But I thought it really spoke to something as we look at this into the future. So again, as we talk about trends, we want to be thinking about, well, not just what's occurring at the moment, not just where we're sourcing our energy at the moment, regardless of what that source of energy is, whether it's renewables, whether it's fossil fuels or nuclear, everything else that might be out there, and still into the future. We want to think about, well, what's it going to look like in the future? So we can think this 30 years out, which is the projections that ExxonMobil was doing with this slide. You can see, I think, three key things there, three key objectives to bring out of that particular slide. We can see that if we look at the United States, again, getting away from the global for a minute, and start to bring this back to home, we can see that the population is going to be increasing over time. Maybe no surprise there. We read about that. We also can see that the amount of productivity in the nation is going to keep increasing. Well, that's a good thing. At the moment, you know, we've got a glitch in the system, glitch in the economy. It's been going on for a few years. You can see where that shows up there, but projections are it's going to keep going north. The other thing that we look at is the fact that energy demand is actually going to decrease, or at least is projected to decrease over time. A lot of that is conservation. A lot of that is more efficient use of energy, the different technologies that we're bringing to bear, and we keep seeing more and more of those as we go into the future. In fact, I heard a politician that was discussing that even on the radio as I was driving to this particular meeting tonight. So there's a variety of things in the future that will likely drive that. So those are three trends that we want to keep an eye on. The point when you start to look at the last one there, if we're going to increase population, increase the amount of utilization, we think about the GDP, where is that energy going to come from then? So, you know, as we're watching it decline maybe over the course of 30 years, what are we actually going to be sourcing it from? And I think you heard in the State of the Union, and I agree with that particular point as it was mentioned, it's going to be all the above. It's going to be the renewables, it's going to be the fossil fuels, it's going to be the nuclear, it's going to be things that we're likely going to be discovering as we go future. Think about hydrogen and a variety of other things. All those are in there because energy demand is something that is going to be a big deal for not just us within the United States, but we think about the global picture out there and we start to go out to some of the other nations. We put together a slide that gives you an idea and talks about the pace of development that we're seeing in Pennsylvania. This looking at just the Marcellus wells. So take out the shallow wells that Bill mentioned, take out some of the other development that likely will be going on as we go into the future. We think about Utica and some of the others. This is one that may be a little hard to see, at least a couple of the colors. But you can see with the Marcellus how much has been developed up to this point and where it's been developed in Pennsylvania. So it gives you a little bit of an idea about pace. One thing I'll mention about pace is the pace seems to be slowing at the moment. And there seems to be a shifting as to where it's occurring in Pennsylvania. And we'll talk about what some of those factors are. But again, as this particular slide cycles through, this is like combing. You can't, there you go. This is like combing where I drove down from tonight. And again, you can see there's some hot spots there. This big area up in the north central northeastern part of the state, which is what we refer to as a dry gas area, where Bill was talking about out in Cambria County. Bill, where's Cambria? Right there? I look about right. Here's Blair. There's Cambria right there. So we look at Cambria, for instance, not so much there. So this part of the state, not a lot of pipeline in the ground, the big transmission pipeline. That's still coming, and that's a driver, and that's part of the story. So again, there's pieces here that are driving where this development and why the development might be occurring in one place versus the other. And then down here in the southwestern corner of the state, that's a very important part of the story that we're going to kind of shift our story as we talk about Marcellus too, as we think about what this development will look like as we look into the near term, probably the midterm. The long term will depend on what the price regimen is out there. And we can also start to break that out. We look at individual counties. So Bradford County, Lycoming, Tioga, Susquehanna, north central, northeastern part of the state. That's where most of the production right now, most of the yield that's coming out of the Marcellus is coming from those counties in that part of the state. Well, why is that? Well, the shale is thick, so the geology is right. There's a lot of land area up there being developed, but there's a lot of takeaway capacity. So we have a lot of big transmission pipe that was already in the ground that's taking that gas off the market, taking some of that gas and bringing it down here, residential use, industrial use, and a variety of other uses when we think about some of the remanufacturing or the reutilization of some of that gas. Southwestern part of the state, as you go down the list, I'm not going to go through them all, but Washington, Greene, Westmoreland, get down that corner of the state, then you're starting to talk about that wet gas. So we talk about the dry. What's dry? Dry means that it's not necessarily that it's dry, it doesn't have any water in it. We're not talking about moisture there. We're talking about the fact it doesn't have other hydrocarbons in it. And Bill mentioned about the ethane. So we talk about wet gas, it means it has those other hydrocarbons. It has ethane, butane, propane, a variety of others, natural gasoline, for instance, that can be found in some of those other counties in the gas that's being developed down there. That gas has to be processed. And when it has to be processed, a lot of additional cost goes into that reprocessing of that gas down there, but it adds a lot of additional value. That value right now is driving the story. So as companies are looking at natural gas prices dropping, they're looking at where they can get the most value for the effort that they're putting into their investment and the work that they're actually putting on the ground. And we're starting to see a shift from that north-central, northeastern part of Pennsylvania to that southwestern part of Pennsylvania, and likely to shift across the border to some degree into Ohio, which we'll talk about, West Virginia, and some others. So we're still seeing quite a bit of drilling going on out there. We'll likely see that into the future. We'll likely start to see that pace slacken as we see the permits, which is the top line right here, starting to slow a little bit. Again, it's not declining, but it's starting to flatten. But the drilling right here is still going up. And we'll have to see where that goes over the course of time. A number of companies are talking about slowing the pace and repositioning some of their assets in other parts of Pennsylvania and other parts of the Appalachian Basin or other parts of the country. So the other thing that we watch is where are the rigs and how much is coming online. And I think it's interesting to note that the number of rigs operating in Pennsylvania right now is actually pretty flat from where it was this time last year. Now, if I'd gone back a year, we would have said that it was in a pace of doubling. If I'd gone back a year before that, it was doubled over the year before that year. So again, we're starting to see this pace starting to change here in Pennsylvania. Not going away, but it is shifting within the state. The other thing that we're seeing, some of the analysis that we've done is, well, how many of the wells that have been drilled, how many of the wells out there are actually on pipe and actually producing gas at this point? It's just a hair over 50%. So what that means is there's a lot of potential productivity out there, a lot of potential yield that's still in the ground, not hooked up to pipe, or has not been hydraulically fractured yet and then put in the pipe and then brought to market. So we're concerned about that in terms of the price. You think about that from an economic standpoint. You look at price right now, it's in the $2.50 range. So if somebody was concerned, well, you know, is the price going to go up? Is it going to encourage drilling? If somebody was leased and they were interested in that, then they would want to see that, you know, those numbers right there change. So again, some trends, pieces that you want to think about as you're thinking about the story being told. The feds have cranked through a lot of this information too, and what they're finding is we look at that northeastern corner of the state, as I mentioned, with those top 4 counties, you're seeing that the bulk of what's coming out of the northeastern part of the United States right now, not just Pennsylvania, but northeastern United States, the bulk of the gas that's being produced right now is not coming from Shale, it's coming from Marcellus, and the bulk of that is coming from those northeastern Pennsylvania counties, northeastern, north central counties. Then you have southwestern Pennsylvania counties we talked about before, West Virginia, and then you have the rest of the counties, or rest of the states when you think more broadly. There is gas being developed in New York. There's gas obviously being developed in Ohio, and you go down into Virginia, parts of Virginia, and some other states around us as well. I also mentioned about the fact that it's not just Marcellus. We want to be thinking about some of the other geology out there. And Bill referenced some of those. If you can see the marker right here, this would be if you did a cut down through the earth and you looked at the different rock layers, the schematic here, you would see this is the Marcellus shale right here, this black shale that's in there. If you went down a couple thousand feet, 2,000 to 3,000 feet, you would find the Utica Shale in parts of Pennsylvania. It's actually in most places where the Marcellus is, there's Utica under it. Not all, but in most places, the two are on top of each other. Now, that doesn't mean that it's prospective for gas or going to yield gas if they drilled into it, but there would be Utica underneath that. In other places in Pennsylvania, there's other shales, and there's more than that are represented on this particular graph, but you have your Huron, you have the Rhine Street, and you have the Geneseo, and in some places, some of those shales, Geneseo, for instance, is actually looking to be more prospective than the Marcellus. And companies are starting to find that as they're drilling through and producing from the Marcellus and going into some of these other geological zones. So I think the story is going to be bigger than the Marcellus as you look at this over time. Now, part of the reason for talking about that is we're going to end tonight, my piece, in talking about workforce. And when you talk about workforce, you're really talking about how long are those, how many jobs, where are they at, how long are they going to last? And this is part of the story right here, the geology. So it's not just Marcellus. The geology is going to dictate the fact that it's going to be going for quite a period of time out there. So again, that's an important consideration. So remember that. The other thing that Bill had talked about was ethane. So if you go to that southwestern corner of the state, companies are developing that ethane. Ethane has a lot of value. The demand for ethane is going up. We have companies now that are looking to take that ethane, make it into polyethylene, which is a plastic base that we use for a lot of feedstock for a lot of the things in the room and around us and we interact with on a daily basis. And other companies are going to come in and site factories likely around that and reutilize that in other products. So again, something we want to be thinking about. So ethane production or some of those other hydrocarbons are again an important part of the story. So as we look and we start to shift away from the Marcellus and think about the Utica, we start to see as we go to that southwestern corner, which is right here in Pennsylvania, we see we have this dry gas zone, which I talked about. We have a wet gas zone. And then as you go further west into Ohio and parts of the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania, there's areas there that there's actually oil in the shale, and companies are now taking this technology and working through that as well. So we see permits going up in some of those areas as companies are starting to make that shift. And again, an important part of the story. But we are seeing the prices coming down because of the volume, the sheer volume that's coming to the marketplace. So again, as we think about some of the important factors that are there. This is actually several weeks old. Gas is typically priced for the most part down in the Henry Hub. This is about about 30 to 40 cents higher than the current price. Gas typically is produced down here in the Gulf to a large degree, shipped up into the Appalachian Basin, up into the metro areas, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, for instance, Boston. A lot of gas shipped across from the Rockies, and a lot of that production is now not coming to those areas. So we're seeing this change in the dynamics of where the gas marketplace is and how that's being satisfied over time. And the rationale for that is because of how much is being produced in the Marcellus and likely from some of these other shales. So we're having a fundamental shift. It's not just on the global basis, but now as we start to come back and see what's occurring here within the country, and also what's occurring within Canada, because we're now starting to ship some of that gas up into the Canadian marketplace because of the sheer volume of what we're producing and the fact that we're now a net exporter of natural gas from Pennsylvania, and that's been about the last 6 months. So we're producing more than we can use. We're also seeing price go down. If you look at, again, the feds have tracked this. Anybody can track it. They look at some different snapshots at a particular point in October. Over the course of a number of years, you can see the price of natural gas is at a 10-year low, and it's been dropping. It's been dropping going into the winter, which is very unusual. We also see a lot of pipeline in the ground, a lot of pipeline projects out there that are still in motion. About half of the big pipeline projects in the country right now are dealing with shale development and are touching the Marcellus as we think about it. So I think a big and important part of the story that's going on, a lot of people are talking about the exploration part, the production of gas, but I think in a lot of the story we think about economics, we think about boom-bust, a boom-bust cycle in any type of extractive type industry, whether we're talking about timber or coal or gas or oil. And I think one of the things that might be different about this is that utilization piece. And we're starting to see more large industry users starting to site industries, power. We think about natural gas-driven power. We also think about steel, paper, plastic, as we mentioned a moment ago, and looking at that as an opportunity, looking at a more predictable price at a lower level than what they've been accustomed to over the course of time, and looking at a supply that seems to be more substantial. So that's something clearly that we're seeing as a university. We're working on some of those economic studies as they try to figure out and work through some of the economic models that would be attached to that. So a number of issues that would be a part of it. We see the amount of coal that's being used to generate power going down. We see the amount of natural gas that's going into power production going up, and we can cite that in a variety of different ways here. So if we have to look at a couple other things out there that I think are important, we need to be thinking about, well, what are the other impacts? And I often, because I live in one of these areas, we think about, well, agriculture is number one. It's impacting agriculture. Yes, it is. It is impacting agriculture in a number of ways, and you can see that down here. We see pipelines going through farms, so we need to make sure we get that part of it right. There's a lot of environmental considerations, as we talked about in a couple of different ways here, that we need to make sure we get those right as we're going through that process. We need to put it back. We need to get productivity back on those farms. This is a dairy farm. This is a pad here. So again, you can see some of those basic changes out there. We also think about tourism, the number 2 industry in Pennsylvania, and the fact that we need to get that part right so we don't industrialize the landscape, but we work together in tandem as this process and create a win-win as often as possible out there. There was a mention about road impacts, and it was interesting as I was driving here tonight. I'm also a township official. One of our neighbors called, and we had a truck that went off the road trying to go through a place that they shouldn't have been going, so trying to get some of those things right. We also see a lot of roads that are being torn up. We see a lot of roads that are being rebuilt, and a lot of dollars are going into that process. So we need to work through that and make sure we get those pieces right as we go through as well. So a lot of education, and that really is a key as we move through that. We're seeing a lot of money come into a lot of counties. We're seeing a lot of money come into a lot of individuals' pockets, a lot of landowners. We're seeing that with local business development. We're seeing it in a variety of places. And we're able to track that using some of the data from the state. We're seeing it go into hotels, hotel tax as a barometer of that. We also see that going into the rail system. Again, something that might be a little bit off the radar. A lot of sand, pipe, stone, and a variety of other things coming in through the rail system. A lot of trucks going off the road when rail is being used. We see big upticks in airport traffic. We also see it in business developments out there, a variety of ways, a variety of places through some of the research that we've done at the university. We continue to look at a variety of different issues and aspects of this as we go forward, but business development and business impacts are a key part. We see it with housing. We see housing prices going up in areas where shale development is going up or going on, but we also see rents going up, and there's an interaction there as well. It can have a positive and negative depending on which side of that particular fence that you might be on. And a variety of social implications would be attached to that. And lastly, as I finish, the part that I want to leave you with is about workforce. We've done a number of workforce assessments through our Penn College branch of Penn State, working in tandem with them and collaborating on some of this and with some of the players out there, the industry players and government agencies that are tracking and working through this. Find out how many jobs, how many different vocations, and along with that, where is that interaction for job build going to be? And what we're seeing is it's not during the pre-drill so much, it's during the drilling, as you can imagine. And it's not just on the rig, but it's mainly in the side businesses that are feeding into that, the subcontractors that are providing some of the goods and services, not just out on the particular drill rig, which is where most people think it is. So most of it's in that part. So then back to the question, well, how long is that drilling phase going to last? What are the different types of jobs? And we have a pretty good breakdown. This is just a few, but we have a pretty good breakdown. We also have a good breakdown now where those training programs are going to be. Bill mentioned about the community colleges, but we're working with a variety of different institutions in Pennsylvania to eliminate the redundancy so that those that are providing this education to this emerging workforce out there are doing it in a way that we're eliminating some of that redundancy. I'm going to skip that just because of time. It takes a while to explain. I think we might have a chance to come back to that in the Q&A. 3 different websites. We have a lot of our information out there, the marcellus.psu.edu, a lot of the research we've been working on, a lot of the maps, a lot of the diagrams that I showed here just now, a lot of the workforce thing in the msetc.org, and a lot of the printed information we have that you can access about all the different aspects of what we're dealing with here tonight in the naturalgas.psu.edu. All right, thank you. They are. Yeah.